This is a Decentered podcast from Rob Watson. Conversations about community media. Look out for Decentered Media on Twitter and on iTunes, or go to decentered.co.uk. Hello, Rob Watson here again, Saturday the 6th of February. And I've been talking in the previous blog about the Leicester Stories project, and what I want to do in this moment of thinking, I hope it's thinking anyway, is talk about what the informing communications approach is going to be for the Leicester Stories project, which I think is something which is integral to community media more generally, and which we can use as a... Oops, really unstable with this today. What am I doing? Okay, let's see if that works. What am I doing? And it seems to be floating all over the place. It'll settle down in a second. One of the things you don't do in community media is put much effort into editing, so this is all staying in. Anyway, the project, the Leicester Stories project, is informed by community media values and principles, and they're different from mass communications and professionalised forms of industrial, commercial, corporate communications, because they serve a different purpose, and the purpose is socially focused purpose. They're encapsulated in the term social gain and social value, and it's the idea that kind of Ruskian idea that it's not what we get for what we create and what we produce, it's what we become in the process. So thinking about community media is it needs a different mindset, and one of the challenges is understanding the kind of framework of deliberation that it opens up. And if we think about it in terms of social spaces for exploration rather than mechanisms for testing assumptions, then it gives it a whole different light, and the needs and the purposes of the way we set it up and the way that we discuss things and the way that we value what people contribute towards different forms and different models and different projects of social media is really it might appear subtle on the surface, but it's quite radically different underneath. And I suppose what we want to try and do with the Leicester Stories project is to innovate in the way that we think about applying principles of community media. Sorry, I have got notes for this because there's a few things that I want to kind of hit in terms of the key issues, and I'll put this out in a blog as well, so if I don't explain it very well, it's kind of written there, and this is based on evidence from other projects that I've worked on and evaluated, and it's also based on a practice and experience of actually doing this over the years and talking to many other people who do this as well. But what kind of happens when you first set up a community media project is there kind of needs to be an orientation of terms, a translation of terms of what do we mean by community media, what is it that's going on. And you can bring together different groups who usually the expectation is with media is that there's a news, for example, is that there's an antagonist and a protagonist, that it's set up in a very particular way in which people have to fight for time and attention, and those with the most extroverted personalities are the ones who get that attention, and some people assume that they have the right and the entitlement to be the people who are always going to get their attention. And what community media is saying in a way is that we challenging those assumptions. That's not the case, and that actually people who have different kinds of stories and different outlooks and different approaches to social interaction and social engagement not only deserve but are entitled to, as a human right, a space within the public domain, the public discourse of using our media and using our media platforms. So that starting point suggests that there's a kind of a meeting of minds at some point, and often in my experience of this is that people don't really get it until they do it, and they don't understand what it's about until they see it in practice, and they say, oh, you can do it differently, you can do it in a different way. One of the unintended outcomes, I think, of the pandemic has been the idea that there's been an acceleration of people accepting things like Zoom calls and Teams calls and using online teleconferencing. Well, that's a form of community media. It's like an immediate form of I don't know this seems to be throwing a wobble, so there we go. See if it's settled down. I can't try and sit still. It's a good job I'm not walking about. I feel as if I'm on a ship. You're feeling giddy at this point. Yeah, there we go. One of the underlying problems that means that it's difficult for people to get a grasp of this and come to a general consensus about it is that community media is a patchwork, and its strength is its diversity, and people will do things in different ways, using different platforms for different reasons, having different motives, having different cultural expectations, and any attempt to try and force community media into being one thing or to stick to a common set of guidelines and rules which suit one group instantly and automatically exclude other people, and therefore betray the principles of inclusiveness on which community media is, I would assert, is founded. So you've got, this kind of patchwork can be quite difficult to work with. People pull in very different directions. It's like herding cats. But there is value in that in terms of diversification of supply of information and media within society, is that it opens up space for people to think and practice, express themselves in different ways, some which might be unique and valued only by that small group of people who are involved in it, but for them that's incredibly important. Whereas mainstream media, the process and the expectation is that there's fairly standardized ways of addressing audiences, and that we're organised neatly and packaged into audiences, whereas people aren't like that in practice, and people have lots of different competing senses of identity and senses of interest and capacities and capabilities and resources and social resources as well. So we try and recognise in community media that this is about doing things in lots of different ways, and that there is no one size, and that what we want to do is let 1,000 flowers bloom. But the follow-on from that then is that what we need to really focus on and look at making sure that what works in practice is that the relationships between people are well-founded, and that they are based on principles of respect, principles of facilitation, principles of listening and deliberation, not of assumption and exclusion and antagonism and blame. And many parts of our mass media have, for one reason or another, have fallen into the trap of becoming antagonistic agents of antagonism. And clickbait is a classic example, and journalism, where people are, you see headlines purely designed to pull you through to read so that the advertising gets seen, and it's that attention economy, where the game is about grabbing as many people's attention as possible for at least a short amount of time, and thereby that fuels the advertising revenue of the media producers. And this is a completely different setup from that. It's about quality, not quantity. It doesn't matter if there's not a large audience or even a well-defined audience. What matters is, one, that the people engaged in making the media get something out of it for themselves. Two, that the people that they seek to support and represent and facilitate the voice of, that they get something out of it. And three, that a wider audience, a wider general public, a wider citizenship might be engaged with that content as well. So it's not as straightforward and linear as the standard mass media model of kind of corporate-driven mass communications would be. Let me turn the page. And my fingers are really dry, and the pages won't turn. This is not the best best way to do this. I should have stayed at home and done it on my desk. So what you're looking for is you're looking to engage people in a kind of mutual relationship, and and recognition that there are mutual interests at heart. And we're seeing this starting to come through in the way that some of our public services are being reformed, and some of the ways in which our local authorities and local councils and public services are being managed. And it's often talked about the kind of the Preston model or the Wigan model. And it's about thinking through how mutuality is making a return, not just locality. Place and locality are very important. They're high up in terms of priorities. But there's no point in having a local response if there isn't a mutual self-interest there and a sustainable self-interest. So it's not about expecting somebody to come in with a well-crafted kind of development project and setting up things, and then when they leave it all falls apart. That kind of trap of community development and infrastructure provision that's happened in the past. This is about ensuring that there's a process of mutual support within the networks of people within a locality or within a specific community. And this is a challenge to many of the established communication models, because the standard communication model is really based around a kind of sense of transaction. It's drawn from the mid 20th century advertising, and there's an assumption that you're buying a product, and this is not. This is about the learning that goes into it, the care that goes into it. The language needs to change. You're not serving an audience, you're creating an audience, curating a community. You're providing support for things that make a difference within that community. And that's one of the adages that really underpins this. It's a community development approach, and it's often said the community media model is 10% media and 90% community development. So when you look at things like the UNESCO model and the international development model, the communication for development model that is used to support media engagement in developing communities, that's the model that we need to apply here in the UK, and we have the need for it as well. So there's a collaborative purpose, which is improvement of our communities, improvement of our society, improvement of our well-being as individuals. There is a social gain purpose that is closely associated with community media. It's not just about speculation, it's not just about profit. There's nothing wrong with profit, you've got to be sustainable. There's nothing wrong with a marketplace, but that's not the only exclusive factor. There are other factors there, and there are other things to consider. So, for example, a profit-driven model would probably move everybody onto a digital platform, but there are many people who can't engage in that kind of commercial model because they don't have the resources, they don't have the capacity, they might not have the physical ability to use computers, they might not have the literacy skills. There's a whole load of reasons why some people are excluded from digital engagement. So we've got to use other forms, more traditional forms. Radio, for example, is still one of the most trusted means of communication. It has that personal, intimate relationship. And in many ways, we squander that by automating things, by following a pattern which is set up by kind of commercial model in the 1980s, and we regurgitate it sometimes, whereas there's actually more opportunity for us to engage with one another in more meaningful ways that come from our experience within our communities, which aren't imposed from the outside. So that brings us on to things like, there's a need to consider how programming styles are understood, and that community media, community radio creates content which is suited to the needs of the people involved, not which are, if you like, historically suited or matched or out of the tradition of corporate media production. It could be ad hoc. The quality in professional terms, commercial terms, might be low, but the audience engagement, the interpersonal engagement with the people who care about that might be incredibly high, and it might be valued because it's the one opportunity that you have in your life, your weekly experience, your daily experience, to hear somebody like you talking about things that you relate to in your neighbourhood or in your network or in your identity group. So it's not just about being served with programs, it's being part of the process, creating them and having a say about them and co-creating how those programs work. So there's that kind of sense. It draws on a sense of mutual intersubjectivity, to use a technical phrase. Just really a sense of how do we understand each other? How do we make our experience meaningful for one another? What is it that engages people and allows us and helps us to understand where we're coming from and what it is that we are about and why our experience of some things matters? And it's not just reduced to vacuous vox pops that are regurgitated to fill some time on a news bulletin, but they're actually, this is really drawing on somebody's experience. And I use the phrase a lot at the moment, which is it's not about opinions. There are plenty of them around. It's about experience, and nobody can take your experience away from you. Your experience is your experience, and that has to be legitimised. I think it has to be something which people say, we stand up for that and we commit ourselves to respecting each other's experience. We might not agree with it, we might not tolerate it, but at least we acknowledge it, and that's the starting point for that level of mutual understanding. So I suppose you'd sum this up in a way is that it's very much grounded in a community development approach. It's media as a tool for community development. There's a long tradition and history of this. It's not something which is it's not part of the standard media studies curriculum. It's like you get taught about the industry, you get taught about professional standards, you get taught about how to network with people in to go and get a job, that kind of thing, and to work towards targets and KPIs and things like that. Self-identity and self-expression are things which are in short supply. But we have the tools and we have the capacity, some better than others, as I've shown and demonstrated. But you know what? Who cares? It's like, deal with it. It doesn't have to be slick. It doesn't have to be professionally made. It doesn't have to. I think YouTube, is a good example of how boring it becomes when everybody gets so professional, whereas it started off in people's bedrooms and there was a kind of honesty and authenticity to people's, what people were sharing, and that broke ground, and then networks and communities formed around that. So this stuff is quite, it's quite powerful, and the more that we recognise it and engage with it, the better. Anyway, I've gone on for quite a considerable time. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm on decentered.co.uk. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter, which is @DecentedMedia. And my website, my email address, is robwatson@decentered.co.uk. The Leicester Stories project, if you on Twitter and Instagram, we're just starting up. It's @Lec Stories, and the website will be, it's not built yet, leicesterstories.uk. Okay, I'll go and lie down in a dark room now because I think I've struggled enough with this today. So I'll speak to you soon. You've been listening to the Decentered podcast. I'm Rob Watson. If you want to find out more information, contact me on Decentered Media via Twitter or go to decentered.co.uk.